In the early days of the COVID pandemic, life was chaotic. And in that chaos, people still needed to travel. Countries across the globe helped simplify that process with new digital tools. In Canada, it was an app called ArriveCAN, which helped clear customs and track important health information, among other things. The app arrived just a few weeks after the first shutdowns began. How much should an app like that cost? Thousands? Tens of thousands? What about tens of millions? The final cost to develop and operate the ArriveCAN app has been nearly $60 million. For an app with an initial budget of just under $3 million. How do we get to that number? Getting there is complicated. We have to look at 3 companies who have received over $1 billion in federal contracts and what they represent about Canada's opaque and illogical system of outsourcing that has sparked a wide number of investigations and cost taxpayers millions. The origins of the ArriveCAN app are simple enough. The government contracted out 3 IT firms they've worked with quite significantly in the past: GC Strategies, Dalian, and Corridix. Those 3 companies, for the most part, subcontract out the work to IT professionals and take a commission fee. Together, they developed the app in a few weeks at a cost of $80,000. Before we get into how $80,000 turned into $60 million, let's take a look at the companies behind the app and what we know about how they got the contract. GC Strategies is the company that received the most government money for their work on the app, around $19 million, although GC Strategies co-founder Christian Firth says the number is more like $11 million. GC Strategies have been working with the federal government since 2011 under Stephen Harper. Back then they were called Corridal. GC Strategies is just 2 people, Christian Firth and Darren Anthony. The pair never did any actual work on ArriveCAN. Instead, they took government requirements for subcontractors, and in some cases copy and pasted them into new job postings that they used to find IT workers who would build the app, including multinational corporations like BDO or KPMG. If you're wondering why the government didn't just award a contract to BDO or KPMG, buckle up. In April 2020, GC Strategies was given a sole source contract valued at $2 million. That means they didn't have to apply for the contract, it was just given to them. In May, the government opened up a larger $25 million contract for ArriveCAN that was to be open to public competition. GC Strategies themselves somehow had a hand in shaping the requirements of that contract, and used that opportunity to narrow the posting in a way that made it difficult for others to apply. GC Strategies won the contract. No one else applied. This is the first instance in the ArriveCAN scandal where the lack of information is maddening. We don't know who exactly decided that GC Strategies should get the first contract in April, or who allowed them to have a role in designing the contract in May, and we don't know why GC Strategies has had such a close relationship with the federal government for so long, but more on that in a bit. What we do know is that GC Strategies has received over $250 million in contracts from the Trudeau government, getting their first contract just 3 weeks into the government's first term. Yet it wasn't until 2023 that Trudeau publicly stated,
Obviously, this is a practice that seems highly illogical and inefficient.
The other 2 companies, Dalian and Corridix, go together. The founder of Dalian, David Yeo, is the grandson of a former chief of the Alderville First Nation in Ontario. As an Indigenous-run business, Dalian applies for a lot of government contracts under the federal procurement strategy for Indigenous business. Dalian, like GC, has only 2 employees. They often partner with Corridix to apply for government contracts. Together, the 2 companies, either individually or in joint ventures, have received over $914 million in government contracts since 2011. This type of arrangement, an Indigenous-led business partnering with a non-Indigenous-led business, can often be used as a sort of Trojan horse, allowing businesses to gain access to contracts that were set aside for Indigenous businesses. There's no explicit evidence of that happening here as of yet, but it's worth noting. David Yeo has said he had a hand in creating the procurement strategy for Indigenous business and faced backlash when he became a public servant in the Department of National Defence in 2023, while still a director at Dalian. Dalian was awarded a contract from that department in September 2023. The same day, Yeo started leading an IT project team as a member of the government. Finally, Dalian has been questioned as to whether or not they met the federal requirements for contracts awarded to Indigenous businesses under the procurement program. Under those contracts, 1/3 of the work on the project needs to be completed by Indigenous people. A detailed audit is currently underway on Dalian to see if they met those requirements, and a summary will be made public when they are complete. Dalian received about $8 million for their work on ArriveCAN. While the very idea that the government would hire 3 separate companies who would do nothing except subcontract other companies seems absurd and inefficient, the nature of subcontracting provides another frustrating wrinkle to this scandal, whether intentional or not. Businesses are not required to disclose who they subcontract out to, and how much money these companies or individuals received. In fact, they're allowed to keep that information private, as it's deemed a privacy concern. This means that although we have a pretty good estimate of how much money the 3 companies received, we don't know exactly how much they kept, who they subcontracted out to, and how much those companies were paid. And while the publicly available information on these 3 companies and their role in ArriveCAN paints a suspicious picture, people on the inside thought something was wrong too. A Montreal-based IT company, Bottler, was approached by Christian Firth for work with the Canadian Border Services Agency, or CBSA. Firth set up a meeting with the CBSA's then director, Cameron McDonald. Bottler thought it was strange that Firth had reached out personally, rather than through GC Strategies, and decided to record their conversations. Among several conversations and email correspondences, it became clear that Firth and McDonald had a close relationship. Firth continually pushed for Bottler to praise McDonald specifically when presenting to other members of the government. McDonald, in conversations with Bottler, pushed them to work with GC Strategies and let Firth work his magic. McDonald and Antonio Utano, another CBSA employee who has since been promoted to Director General of the CRA, have been directly involved in a number of contracts awarded to GC Strategies, Dalian, and Coradix. Yet when the ArriveCAN scandal broke, McDonald sent an internal email to a number of officials in the CBSA who would potentially be asked to answer questions about the selection process, giving them possible answers to prep and going over general strategy. In that email he writes, "Why GC Strategies? But I think we are all grappling with who selected GC Strategies." The answer most likely is that McDonald and Utano, who had close and ongoing relationships with GC Strategies and Christian Firth, made that decision.
I think the really concrete moment for us was when we received an email from GC Strategies showing us a document that had been executed between Dalian, a company we'd never even heard of, and GC Strategies to implement our Bottler solution. And Bottler wasn't even named on it. It was just myself and Amir that had been named personally as consultants. And at that point, it was just red flags going off all over the place.
The contract, the way that it was executed, was a contract between the CBSA and Dalian and Coradix. And then they subcontracted the work to GC Strategies, who then subcontracted the work to us personally and not our company.
Firth went on to say that the CBSA was angry because the cost of the project had risen to nearly $500,000, since GC Strategies was asking 15% and Dalian was taking 20%, in addition to the money paid to Bottler. Firth implied that the costs had gotten too high and the CBSA was ready to pull the contract. In order to secure the contract for Bottler, Firth would waive his 15% fee in exchange for Bottler paying him later, out of money that would come from future potential government contracts.
We were still facing misconduct, and I submitted a second report. And in direct response to that second report, we were terminated. We faced immediate reprisal. The contract was canceled. We had done all the work, but we weren't paid for the work that we did. So it was an immediate kind of shut down for coming forward with that misconduct.
The CBSA asked us to hand over the evidence to Coradix, and then GC Strategies contacted us and told us that, I learned that the CBSA is asking you to hand over all the evidence to GC Strategies, and then GC Strategies will hand over the evidence to Coradix, and then Coradix will hand over the evidence to the CBSA, which we said, no, we will not do that.
Dalian and Coradix forged sections of the 2 Bottler founders' resumes, changing a 2-month internship into years of work experience, and inventing a fictional company that Amir had worked at in order to secure contracts and charge higher day rates. The CBSA has since provided evidence that Firth gave gifts and hospitality to Utaro and McDonald. In January 2024, Diane Daly, a former CBSA employee who worked under McDonald, alleged she was pressured to give false testimony that would clear McDonald of any wrongdoing. She refused and gave a 3.5-hour interview. Later, she was suspended from her position at Public Works. She thinks because of her refusal to give false testimony. And now, finally, we can answer the question. How did those three companies manage to make the app for $80,000, but have the final cost balloon to $59.5 million? We don't know exactly, but we have some pretty good estimates. The Attorney General's report on ArriveCAN said the bookkeeping was some of the worst she had ever seen, that many documents were either destroyed or never created, and landing on an exact number is nearly impossible. But let's get into it. The cost of developing the app in the first place is just the tip of a very messy and badly documented iceberg. Oversight of the app was transferred to the Canadian Border Services Agency, and while the app began as a way to declare health information, it rapidly changed into an app where you could fill out customs forms and other travel information, track vaccination records, among other things. Border Services continually asked for new updates to the app to keep up with changing regulations and to add new features. The cost of those updates, along with a number of other factors, ballooned into the tens of millions of dollars, with no apparent budget in sight. But before we go on, the efficacy of those updates is questionable. In 2022, over 10,000 iPhone users were told to quarantine or face fines of up to $5,000 through the ArriveCAN app, despite not being part of an outbreak. Not only was this deemed to be a privacy violation, the error took weeks to fix, not days, 2 years after the app was released. Part of the justification for the unbelievable costs of the ArriveCAN app is that it had to be developed and updated quickly to adjust for changing conditions during the pandemic. Yet in this case, it was anything but. Documents show that only 3 of the updates to the app were properly tested. Part of that was because a number of subcontractors working on the app did not have the security clearance to be working on the app, something that was supposed to be handled by Darren Anthony of GC Strategies, but as he testified before the House of Commons, he didn't know that was a requirement at the time. A breakdown of the expenses of the app is as follows: $8.8 million for new app releases, $7.5 million for Service Canada call center time, $5.2 million for data management, $4.9 million for indirect costs such as employee benefits and accommodations, $4.6 million for cloud hosting services, another $4.6 million for authentication of vaccines. The list goes on, but I'll stop there. The cost per day of each person working on the app was $1,090, a number that would have been $675 if handled internally. Now, I can't say for sure how much ArriveCAN would have cost, although the initial budget was under $3 million. And it bears mentioning how complicated an app like this is. Anything that needs to securely connect with the government and people's private information, as well as all of the other rapidly changing rules, regulations, and health information it tracks, there's a lot going on. But $59.5 million, which may not even be the real number because of horrendous record keeping, is either complete and utter incompetence, corruption, or both. A wide array of investigations are still taking place, trying to get to the bottom of what really happened with ArriveCAN and who is to blame. GC Strategies, Dalian, and Corridix have been suspended from taking government contracts for the time being. McDonald and Utano have been suspended as well, pending an internal CBSA investigation. They say they're scapegoats, and the real person responsible for wrongdoing is McDonald's old boss, Min Doan, who's now the CTO for the federal government. For now, there's no way to know if he's telling the truth. And it seems that this wasn't a one-off. In September of 2024, a former government employee pled guilty to awarding 72 sole source contracts to a business he owned while he was in office. The RCMP says this is just the beginning of another 5 to 10 fraudulent billing cases they are expected to bring to trial in the coming months. In general, the way that the federal government works with external partners is deeply broken. And while it may have been broken before the Trudeau government, it's gotten worse. When Trudeau was elected in 2015, the Liberals promised to decrease government reliance on external contractors. Yet federal spending on external contractors went up almost 42% between 2015 and 2021. Even after ArriveCAN, external spending keeps climbing, from $17.5 billion in 2021-22 to $21.6 billion in 2023. While governments in the UK and US invest in internal IT professionals who can solve many of the digital problems facing governments today, Canada lags behind, continuing to throw money at external contractors who can't do it themselves and who obscure where those tax dollars actually go. This is, in Trudeau's own words.
Illogical and inefficient.
But even as the pieces of the ArriveCAN scandal continue to fall into place, that system doesn't seem set to change. Which leaves me to wonder how many government officials and their friends are benefiting. Unraveling the answer to that may mean that ArriveCAN was just the beginning.